This is apropos. Well, the White House says that the president is holding out hope for negotiations and will make a decision about whether to join the Israeli campaign within the next 2 weeks. If Trump does decide to join, Iran would be expected to retaliate against some of the tens of thousands of American troops that are stationed across the Middle East. Billions of dollars worth of weapons and military equipment are also stored in the region. With the details, here's August Atkinson.
Naval, land, air and logistical bases. The United States maintains 8 permanent military bases in the Middle East, along with several temporary sites. In total, 40,000 to 50,000 American troops are stationed in the region, a presence that has lasted for decades. About 10,000 are based in Qatar, at Al Udeid, the largest military base in the region. It serves as the headquarters for the U.S. Central Command. Established in 1996, it covers 14 hectares and hosts around 100 aircraft and drones. The base has played a key role in operations across Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and the fight against ISIS. In Bahrain, the naval support activity hosts 9,000 personnel. It's home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet and serves as a major logistics, supply and command hub. The Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates focuses on reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and support for aerial combat operations. It hosts advanced aircraft and various surveillance planes. In Iraq, the Erbil Air Base is used by U.S. forces for air operations, especially in northern Iraq and Syria, where troops advise Kurdish and Iraqi forces. The U.S. military presence in the Middle East is thus extensive, with some bases located just a few hundred kilometers from Iranian territory.
All of their bases are within our reach, and we will not hesitate to target them in the host countries.
In some places, crossing the Persian Gulf is enough for Iran to reach American bases. It could also rely on one of its most active proxies in the region, the Houthis in Yemen. Armed by Tehran, they regularly strike Israel and U.S. positions in the area. But if the U.S. decides to go to war, its undeniable military superiority would put Iran at serious risk.
With more, let's bring in Ray Takeyh, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Ray, thanks for being with us this evening. As we saw there in that report, the US has a substantial military presence across the Middle East. At this point, we're still no clearer about whether or not Donald Trump intends to join the Israeli campaign. What are you expecting him to do?
My suspicion will be that President Trump initially would want to have some kind of a negotiations with Iran and hope that those negotiations will lead to some kind of an agreement. That agreement would have to be quite exacting and encompass elimination of indigenous enrichment capability. I suspect that'll be his first instinct. And if that doesn't work, then there is a possibility of American intervention on behalf of Israel, along with Israel.
And is Iran likely, do you think, to be trying to use Friday's meeting in Geneva? The foreign minister is going to be there meeting several EU ministers. Will that be all about sending a message to Donald Trump?
Honestly, unlike the previous rounds of arms control negotiations between the two powers, EU is not that important in this, but nevertheless, it's a first salvo in diplomatic outreach that the Iranian government is doing, and certainly they will pass on messages to the EU representatives to hand to the Iranians. But the key here is going to be when Iran's foreign minister, should Iran's foreign minister meet with President Trump's emissary to these talks, Steve Witkoff. That's going to be the key indication. To some extent, what the Americans hear from the Europeans will establish the predicate for such a meeting.
And what kind of concessions do you think that Iran might be willing to make?
Prior to this particular engagement, there was a deal on the table where Iran would at some point forego domestic enrichment and essentially participate in a regional enrichment bank. I'm not sure if that agreement is still on the table, but in some ways, Iran has to pledge in this meeting that it will cease domestic enrichment and have confidence that initially it will receive its nuclear energy needs from a regional enrichment bank to which it would become part owner. Some variation of that deal is possible, but at this point, it's going to be much more exacting. Iran, as far as the Israelis and the Americans are concerned, has just finished losing a war. It has lost control of its airspace. It has had military leadership decapitated. Therefore, it's not in a position to dictate terms.
And Donald Trump, he doesn't seem to be in line with some of his most senior advisors on this issue, including, of course, his Director of National Intelligence. They've told him that Iran wasn't immediately about to build a nuclear bomb. So who exactly or what exactly is influencing Donald Trump here in his decision-making?
At large extent, Israeli military success. Israelis have been more successful than anybody thought they would be. They have easily penetrated Iranian airspace. They have disabled Iranian air defense networks. They have attacked key Iranian facilities. They have suffered some damage, but not as much damage they expected. So I think part of the reason why the United States is looking at intervention against one facility, the Fordo nuclear facility that the Israelis cannot disable, is because of the success that Israelis have had, particularly in terms of making the Iranian airspace safe for aircraft intervention.
Well, does he actually have a strategy then, or is he just kind of simply being swept along by what he's being told by the Israeli military, as you say, by the Israeli Prime Minister?
Well, the strategy, I don't know if the president has a strategy, but he had a demand. His demand was that Iran cease domestic enrichment. And he is seeking to get that potentially through military intervention, what they could not at this point get through diplomatic meetings between the Iranian and American representatives. So he does have that particular precondition for what he views as indispensable in terms of Iranian nuclear program. So I don't know if that's strategy, but it certainly is a demand that can actually be effectuated through military means. So it is hoped.
And Ray, what would actually happen next if the US does go and attack Iranian nuclear sites? Is it inevitable then that those American army bases that we were talking about in that report earlier, that they would be the first thing targeted? Would they be the only thing targeted? What would happen then?
Well, I'm not sure if the Iranian retaliation would be immediate. Iran would not be in a position to really retaliate. Its defenses have been compromised. Its airspace is now in command of other countries. If Iran does essentially intervene again and kills American servicemen, then the retaliation is going to be much more robust and much more extensive. So I don't anticipate immediate Iranian intervention, but, history has a long arch. And in the future, those military bases could be subject to attack by most likely Iran's proxies as opposed to Iran itself. That's how they like to operate. But this certainly puts the Iranian nuclear confrontation at an asymmetrical level for a protracted period of time, no question about it.
And how close is Iran to actually developing a nuclear weapon? Is it even possible to say with certainty?
There are a lot of unanswered questions about the Iranian nuclear program, as indicated by its recent rebuke by the IAEA. There are a lot of things about the Iranian nuclear program we don't know. Everybody focuses on the three sites, Fordo, Natanz, and of course Esfahan. And the Israelis have attacked a number of other facilities, including universities where there are such laboratories. But do we have a full-scale knowledge of the Iranian nuclear program? The IAEA doesn't. Maybe Israeli Mossad does, and therefore they have a much more of a reliable target list. But whatever the Iranian nuclear program was, in aftermath of this particular crisis, it is likely to be surreptitious and subterranean. So this is not the end of the Iranian nuclear challenge. It's the beginning of a new phase where the IAEA is going to have less visibility, and Iran is going to move from creating a civilian nuclear program that was transparent to some extent to a nuclear weapons program that is surreptitious and difficult to detect. So this begins a new phase in the Iranian nuclear melodrama that we have all witnessed for the past 2 decades.
And is the risk then being overstated by Israel to justify perhaps regime change in Iran and to distract from what's happening in Gaza and the domestic pressure that Benjamin Netanyahu has been coming under, particularly in the last few weeks?
Prime Minister Netanyahu is often accused of that sort of a cynical maneuver, but he has been, to be fair, talked about the Iranian nuclear challenge and the need to address it in a robust way for a long time. So I'm not quite sure if his domestic politics are that much on his mind. The reason why previously Prime Minister Netanyahu had not been able to engage in this kind of activity was because A, he didn't have the support of various American administrations. Two, the Israeli security establishment was divided. This time, the security establishment in Israel was not divided. They were all in favor of this particular attack. The cabinet was in favor of it. And the Americans at some level may have signed off on it.
And finally then, Ray, some observers warning that if the regime in Iran were to fall, a vacuum would open in what is clearly a dangerous region. What actually would a new regime look like?
It's almost impossible to tell because you're talking about the regime that has been in power for 45 years. It has kind of a cadre and elites dispersed throughout the country. What it will look like, who will succeed it, would it be ethnic separatism, would the central government fall, would there be civil strife, civil disorder? All those things are possible. It's just nobody can predict with any precision what happens when the regime collapses. From the Israeli perspective, and many in the United States, anything is better than the current Iranian regime. Therefore, whatever turbulence and unpredictability awaits the collapse of the Islamic Republic, there are many people who would welcome that opportunity as opposed to living with the incumbent Iranian government.
Right, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme. Many more questions we could ask. Ray Takeyh, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you.